Hey everyone, this is Igor from Vinousreverie, the shop for the adventurous wine drinker, and welcome to another episode of everything you ever wanted to know about wine, but were afraid to ask. Episode 6, we're going to discuss the region Languedoc in southeast France. And my co-host Kevin Wink is me, so it should be a fun show. All right. There he is. Man
Hi,
of the hour. How are you, Kevin?
do I look sleepy?
I look sleepy too, so I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm up every night at this point till like 2 a.m. writing emails in like 2 or 3 different languages to suppliers. And so yeah, today
Yeah.
unfortunately I'm a little on the tired side.
No, it's funny today. I signed up to do swimming laps. They have like an Olympic sized pool pretty close by, and I haven't swum like that in years. And you get to, like a lane for like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's funny. So I swam there and back, and I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna be here for 45 minutes.
Yeah. But swimming is great exercise though. I
Yes.
mean, you're moving every part of your body. And people underestimate how difficult it is. It's like, oh, well, how hard could this be? And the average person after about like 6 to 8 minutes is like worn out.
Yeah, I was swimming next to a lane with a gentleman who definitely was a professional. I mean, he was like in and out, in and out. It's like, oh my God,
Yeah,
it felt a little, like overwhelming, being next to him. But yeah, you just have to get into that swimming shape, which is quite a shape. Yeah.
yeah. Well, good for you. I'm glad you're doing that. I mean, one of the things I regret during COVID
Yeah.
is I belong to a great athletic club in the city with 2 Olympic-sized pools.
Yes.
And I used to swim 2 or 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And I haven't I haven't gone swimming since COVID.
Well,
And
if they're open, if you have some free time, I mean, it doesn't sound like you have too much free time now, but yeah.
well, now I do what I call wine Pilates. I mean, Pilates is strengthening your core, and each case of wine is 36 pounds. And so here's what Kevin does all day long: wine Pilates.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I thought tonight's topic would be fun because we keep exploring the idea of mythbusters.
Yes.
And Languedoc itself, I think, is a bit mysterious to people. On one hand, I think there's a general understanding of where it is in France. It's this long, big region that borders the Mediterranean coast.
Yeah.
Basically from the southern Rhone down to the coast of Spain. But one of the things mysterious about it is such a big region. It's like, how can you really know much about Languedoc?
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, its past was that this was one of the regions in France where they were overproducing wine. But that shouldn't really come as a surprise, because at various points every region in France was overproducing wine. Because of the strong government programs to support farming. In fact, one of the funniest things to me about France is anytime the farmers are unhappy, they then go on these demonstrations in Paris where they tie up all the traffic by driving their tractors through the streets of Paris. So the French politicians are like, whoa, we don't want any unhappy farmers anywhere. If they want to grow grapes, we're going to pay them for it. We don't even care if the wine is terrible. I mean, the funny thing is the French consumers apparently don't care if the wines are terrible either, because you go into the big French supermarkets and you see 4-stack after 4-stack of these just boatloads of wine.
Yeah.
And a lot of it at one point came from the Languedoc.
Yeah.
And some people think, oh, Languedoc wines, aren't they just cheap and of poor quality? And in my opinion today, even though you can obviously find cheap and poor quality wines anywhere,
Yeah.
Languedoc is producing perhaps the most fascinating wines in France. I mean, part of it is because of just how large the area is, and from how large the area is, it has all of these different individual subregions within Languedoc. And another topic we've explored in a previous episode is minerality.
Yeah.
And you've got all of these different areas of Languedoc with completely different minerality to them, and from the areas right near the Mediterranean, where you've got the classical clay and limestone, to areas further inland where you have granite, you've got volcanic soils, you have a metamorphic rock called schist, that's formed through just generically what you call pressure. The pressure can come from various things. It can come from volcanic activity, heating up the soil. It can come from two plates sliding together, which compresses, the geologic sediments that, that were deposited in those areas. And one of the more fascinating areas to me is possibly what you might call the middle Languedoc, about halfway between Montpellier, and the Spanish border, a little bit northeast of Béziers, where you've got two particular subregions, one called Saint-Chinian and the other called Fougères. They're only 10 miles.
Let me interrupt you. I'm drinking a Fougère from Schist. So it's a couple of things you just mentioned. Yes.
Yeah. And in case you think that Igor is slurring his speech talking about shit, it's schist, Schist. Yes. And schist is a metamorphic rock. It's essentially a fractured rock, from this pressure that I've been talking about. And Fougères has all this black schist, and which gives this kind of smoky, flinty flavors and aromas, to the wines from Fougères. And it's this little basin that is about 10 miles inland from the Mediterranean. And so you've got, sort of even more of a concentration of all this minerality in this kind of bowl-shaped basin that, that is Fougères. But 10 miles slightly to the southwest, you have Saint-Chinian.
Yeah.
And the plate of black schist from the north, where Fougères is located, collides 10 miles to the southwest with a plate of limestone where Saint-Chinian is located. And so you've got these two plates, clashing. So Saint-Chinian, just 10 miles away, has completely different wines. That is a combination of both schist minerality and limestone minerality. And then as you get further, south, near the Pyrenees, you have Côte de Roussillon, and with these really dramatic landscapes with the, granite, peaks of the Pyrenees, in the distance, and all that decomposed granite from the Pyrenees having washed down into the vineyards of, Côte de Roussillon, for eons, and so, anywhere you have granite, you've got, a feeling of precision, feeling of purity, a feeling of, sort of like, cleanliness or pristineness of, of the wine. And then as you go a little bit further inland, into areas like Corbière, and then the westernmost, appellation in Languedoc, which is called Cabernet. Again, you've got a combination of volcanic and granite influences, and so each of those areas will have its own unique characteristics. So you've got this kind of mysterious area to the south of into the south of France, and it's like, well, how do you really characterize it? Well, you can't, frankly, but the French do like to look at their wine regions more according to what are essentially administrative borders. Yeah. So you've got this huge area of Languedoc, which was combined with Roussillon, which frankly is completely different, because Roussillon is the, area of, southeastern France right above the border with Spain. And I already talked about Côte de Roussillon. You've got all this granite from the Pyrenees, which is very different from really the rest of Languedoc. And it used to be called Languedoc-Roussillon. Right. For some reason, it's just people like to refer to it as Languedoc as if it's all one area. And as you've heard from the way I've described things, no, it's just not, at this point. In fact, into the northern part of Languedoc, as you get closer to this huge mountain range, it's right in the middle of France called the Massif Central, you again get a lot of granite, and there's, very interesting areas, a little bit to the northwest of Montpellier, that are in the foothills of the Massif Central, where you get all this granite. So you can go subregion by subregion within the Languedoc, and you get different characteristics from all the wines. And I just find it fascinating. For someone like me that focuses on native varietals to begin with, and then focuses on the geology of each areas, I find more, interesting differences across the Languedoc than frankly any wine region in France to begin with, and really any wine region in Europe overall.
Well, and Kevin, it's funny you mentioned a lot of these things because Languedoc, I think at one point, maybe still is, made the most wine in the wine world, right? I think 5% of all wine is made in the Languedoc, maybe Languedoc Roussillon if they combine them, and most of it was bulk wine, as you mentioned. It's they put in big containers and they ship it all over the world, and it's sold on cheap. So that's how it got its reputation. But now some of the areas you described, and I think a lot of the producers, prominent producers, now I think a lot of the kind of subpar wine still comes from the Languedoc region, but you can get some great values from that region, and I think it's partially because the prices are depressed because of its negative reputation. So I think maybe the land is cheap, the region doesn't have reputation, so when you get great wine out of that region, you get great values. They're typically, you could get probably more below $20 price point, as a reference. You probably get more great wines out of the Languedoc than maybe any other region in the world.
Yeah, unfortunately, for the region overall, you're exactly right. But fortunately for wine buyers, those great values do exist. And like in Burgundy, there's definitely some pretty bad Burgundy produced, frankly.
Yes.
But even the bad Burgundies at retail cost $25 a bottle.
Really cheap was it? If you're lucky, 25.
Yeah. And in Languedoc, these places that are still producing just oceans of wine.
Yes.
Those bottles unfortunately end up here in the U.S. on somebody's shelf at like $6.99 a bottle.
Yeah.
And so the people that are trying to produce better wines from the Languedoc, they're like, well, what can I really do here? I mean, how much more can I push price points? If people are just producing like boatloads of this stuff that retails for like, $7 or $8 a bottle, and so you can get really good quality Languedoc wines for like 16 to 18 bucks a bottle. And, ones that, frankly, in a region right to the east of it, in the Southern Rhone,
yes,
are the equivalent of $25 to $30 bottles of wines from the Southern Rhone. And I mean, one area of the Southern Rhone that, is a very high quality area, in my opinion, is Gigondas. It's a little bit northeast of, of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, only by about 6 to 8 miles. But, again, it's the classic, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre blend, which also, is, has a strong presence, in the Languedoc. But, the typical Gigondas is at least $25 to $30, if not more, and I can find, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre blends from the Languedoc that are just as good as Gigondas, more minerality to them, and they're $16 to $18.
Yes.
So that tells you the value. But, one of the problems in wine is, okay, well, how do you define stuff? How do you make things easier to understand? I just described, two particular areas only 10 miles apart, Fougères and Saint-Chinian, and it's like, that's just frankly two of what are basically like 25 different appellations within Languedoc. So, for the consumer, just like, particularly in an area like this where we're used to 10 wine grapes, and it's like, how do you sort through all that? But what's fun about this is my suggestion is just explore, and go into a wine shop and look for specific appellations within Languedoc. And, one of the more fun and fascinating ones, in my opinion, is the westernmost appellation in Languedoc, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, Cabernet. And the appellation actually is on either side of the ridge that separates rivers flowing to the east into the Mediterranean and rivers that flow west. There's a ridge in the middle of Cabernet, and to the west of the ridge, the rivers flow west into the Atlantic. And I don't know if this was just some French bureaucrat's classification of this or something that somebody realized would be fun and interesting. But because the appellation spans, both the eastern and western side of, the ridge, they thought, oh, well, on the western side, we'll grow Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec. On the eastern side, we'll grow the classic, southern French, or south of France varietals, Grenache, Syrah. Yeah. And in a Cabernet, you can combine, both Bordeaux varietals or you have to combine both Bordeaux varietals, and southern, France varietals. Yeah. And so you've got these weird blends that sound weird of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec, and Grenache and Syrah, but they're fascinating because one of the fun things about this are all the different flavor profiles you can get out of wine. You taste a Cabernet and you're like, God, I've never tasted anything like this in my life, but this is fun. So, yeah.
And what you alluded to, I think, if Languedoc, I think, is probably maybe the only region in France that has relatively loose rules, right? Because you can combine a lot of these grapes. A lot of you mentioned Rhone Valley. Well, they can only grow Rhone varietals. Bordeaux can only have Bordeaux varietals. Obviously, Burgundy, you can only Pinot Noir basically. So Languedoc, because it's so big and loose, I think partially it allows a little more experimentation than other regions. So maybe you could have nice variation there as opposed to other classic regions of France.
Yeah, in fact, what you do have in the Languedoc is great weather. And I mean, it's in the sunny south of France. And, as opposed to the southern Rhone, where, the classic areas of Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Gigondas are about 40 miles inland. And so they're more susceptible to what's considered a continental climate where they get hot. The overall minerality that you get in Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Gigondas does make good wines, but you're 40 miles inland, it gets hot. The grapes get really ripe. You can get alcohol levels of 15 to 16% in some years in the Châteauneuf-du-Papes. And most of Languedoc, or most of the wine producing areas within the Languedoc, are within 10 to 15 miles of the Mediterranean. And so you get the cooling influences, of the weather patterns that circulate around the Mediterranean, the winds that come in off the water, keeps the area a little bit more moist. You've got, a little bit better moderation of diurnal temperatures, from night to day, and in my opinion, the wines frankly stay fresher, and where, I will taste, reasonable amount of what I would almost call cooked Côte d'Aronnes, and I do not taste that kind of quality in most of the Languedoc reds. But one thing you mentioned is because of how large the region is, that a lot of the appellation rules, are, a bit less restrictive. And, we talked a little bit earlier about bad Burgundy, which is all Pinot Noir. Red Burgundy is all Pinot
Yeah.
Noir, for $25 a bottle. One of the greatest bargains out there are these, what are called IGP, indication geographic, protective, where that it's at least from a specific region. But those IGP wines can grow almost any varietal grown in France. And you've got great bargains in Pinot Noir, or in grape varietals such as Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Viognier, that are grown in the Languedoc, because it's good growing conditions. It's sunny all through the growing season, and so you don't have the uncertainties within Burgundy of, okay, when are the fogs coming in and how long are they going to last? And because it's sunny all during the day, all through the growing season. So you have very good growing conditions, nice minerality in the soil, and an interesting place to express these other grape varietals that are better known from other areas in France.
Yeah.
Cheap price. Yeah.
What were we going to say, Kevin? Sorry.
No, but I said, and at cheap prices too.
Yeah, right. And I think from a lot of what I read is that the producers who make excellent wine, I think they actually a little bitter maybe that they're not able to charge higher prices like Bordeaux or Rhone Valley, the more known names. But as you mentioned, the consumer kind of wins out if the consumer is willing to experiment. And once again, I think we're doing such a great service of demystifying wine and really going to the specifics. And it really has to be specifics because, as you mentioned before, you still get the $7 Languedoc wines in US. So when the consumer wants to experiment, let me just go to a supermarket and get some $7 Languedoc. Well, they're not going to get a good wine. You still have to be shopping in that $12 to $18 range to really hit quality. So it's still a little tricky. The consumers, you can't really win out by cheaping out. You still have to, I think, get good quality at to me, an excellent price point, but not a cheap price point.
Yeah, and that's a great point because, I'm not trying to, be self-serving here and drive sales of more expensive wines. But, frankly, if somebody buys an $8 bottle of wine and they're disappointed in it, that's unfair to that region.
Yeah.
Because, it's like, of course, I don't want to be judgmental about, other people's, purchasing decisions and, and all that. But, I think, you should spend, frankly, at least $15 for a bottle of wine. Yeah, I mean, this is something you're going to enjoy for, an hour and a half over a meal. I mean, isn't that hour to hour and a half worth an extra like $8 to $10?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's cheap wine everywhere.
Well, Kevin, I think what I noticed too, sometimes just talking to maybe consumers is that it really depends on persons what they're willing to pay for wine. They'll tell a story to themselves, whatever they want to hear. If somebody loves to buy expensive wine with the belief that expensive wines are more expensive, more better tasting, and I'm thinking maybe like Napa Cab, for example. Like, $100 Napa Cap is going to be great. And it's like, no, it's not going to be great. It's a few examples might be great, but overall, over 50% will not be great. And the same thing, but when you make that argument, a person who buys $2 Chuck, he's like, I knew expensive wines are overrated. And I knew that $2 Chuck is just as good as 100,
Yeah.
You get the two extremes where the wine, that's why you have to be really specific. Because I think anybody could take whatever they want and just go to those extremes. And part of that, I think there's twofold. I think the big distributors or the big outlets win in that situation. And that's why you see so much confusion in the marketplace when it comes to wine. because you mentioned it frequently. There's a lot of wine in the world made, more than could be drunk. But there's not that much great wine in the world made, or really good
Yeah.
wine in the world made.
Yeah.
There's plenty of it to be drunk. And funny enough, I would say a lot of the producers who make really great wines at really nice price points have the hardest time selling those wines.
Yeah, because you always have lower priced wines out there,
Yeah.
you know, and the you know, and I mean, one of the ironies in all of this is if you produce more wine, then you have to spend more to attempt to sell all that wine, and in the process of spending more, you're continually imparting all these messages out, into the marketplace, and the consumers are influenced by all that.
Yeah.
I mean, so I feel like I'm a little bit unfair to a particular wine that I'm about to mention here, because frankly, I have not tasted it in years. But, as I drive around through Northern California visiting clients, I don't know how often I see some huge, billboard, Stella Rosa.
Yeah.
And I once, I think, unfortunately, did have, a taste of a Stella Rosa wine. And I think I could be wrong on this, but I heard at one point that they're making like 20 million cases a year of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, how on earth do you make 20 million cases a year of a wine?
Yeah.
I mean, effectively, you have to buy a couple of huge chemical plants. And that, at the beginning doesn't sound good, like you're going to get some good wine out of that.
Yeah.
But it's like, if Stella Rosa has the market power to have billboards, every 5 miles all through, Northern California, people are going to have the impression, oh, well, that must be a good wine. And then they buy it, and it's like, oh, well, it's whatever. It still has alcohol in it, I guess.
Yeah.
But consumers, I think, are misled by that, but, it's like everybody has their own choices to make. Are they just, looking for, an inexpensive source of alcohol, or are they looking for something interesting? But
yeah, well, that's what happens. Yeah, it's a lot of wine, but lack of choice, I think, because as what you were alluding to, it's typically there's not enough education, and once again, all of that benefits the big guys, and it's kind of pretty label and the price point. Hey, all these big conglomerates, they know what's selling, what the price point typical consumer pays. So they try to sell their wine at that price point to make it as cheaply as possible, and to put the, like the most sellable label, the prettiest looking label on it, or the cutest label, probably cuter more than prettier. Yeah. And you get mediocre wine. So it's the cheapest cost, and just to maximize the profit. It's just the corporation. And wine, I think to a degree, is an art. I mean, you need great ingredients, as you mentioned all the time. Obviously, soil. I think it'd be a great episode to talk about weather and stuff like that. Maybe longitude and altitude. But then at the end of the day, you should need an art, because a couple of things you just mentioned that I want to kind of piggyback on. You mentioned how the consumer doesn't know what to sell, but Esther Mobley last week in her San Francisco Chronicle newsletter, she actually not outed out, but she kind of called out the hypocrisy of White Claw, and she called out both White Claw and the millennials for drinking White Claw because it's she's kind of said, quote unquote, because it's healthy. And I've heard that when White Claw came out, I think in 19, there's barely any, there's no calories or something like that, and it's the healthiest like seltzer out there, hard seltzer.
Mm-hmm.
And now White Claw came up with a drink that's like twice the size, and they call it something like the ultimate or something like that. Basically it's they're admitting that it's not healthy. It was a bunch of baloney to begin with. But they got the consumer base on their end that's buying it, and she's basically saying like, well, millennials, you were telling everybody how you're drinking a healthy wine. Well, now your favorite brand is admitting it's not healthy. So you're kind of like caught in this kind of I don't know, catch-22 or act of hypocrisy. I don't know how to like phrase that.
Yeah, other than knowing that White Claw exists,
Yes.
I'm frankly completely ignorant. But what's the alcohol by volume in White Claw?
Sheesh, I would have to look it up. You know, she was talking about calories in an article. I'm not sure if she actually.
Because basically, I mean, I don't know what the ABV is on it, but basically at this point, you're just talking about cheap sources of alcohol. Is it pleasant? Is it enjoyable? I feel judgmental because I've never had one. But I mean, I can't imagine that. I mean, I definitely know what a success story it's been. I mean, the sales just exploded, but.
Right, and she basically said it's basically malt liquor, and it's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah,
growing up,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Malt liquor. I never associated malt liquor and healthiness. I don't know. I never associated those two terms together. So, yeah.
I mean, how healthy do people look that are holding stuff in bags and sitting on stoops?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, but to your point, the makers of White Claw, they're laughing all the way to the bank, right? They made their gazillions of dollars by selling, inferior drink under the claim that it's healthy, which is completely false. Yeah. And I just want to point that out because that's exactly what happens with Stella Rosa and all these big brands. I mean, that's the same concept. It's the same, what's the term I'm looking for? It's just corporate thought. When big conglomerates take over, it's just the bottom line thought. And I don't think all producers in the wine world think about bottom line. I don't think it's the number one motivation for all of them. I mean, everybody wants to make a living, but I don't think bottom line is the same for everybody. That's just kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I love what I do, because everybody that I source wines from, it's an art for them.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many fascinating characteristics of this. In fact, one of the funny things is we're talking about, larger production wines. It's like, they taste the same every year.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
Because here's the reality. The grapes don't taste the same every year. I mean, every growing season, first of all, every varietal has its own unique characteristics. Every growing season, those varietals express themselves differently, given whatever the weather, the temperature, and everything was that year. So how do you end up with wines that taste the same every year? We don't really want to go into that. Maybe we can do a whole show on things that you do to make your wine taste the same every year.
Yes.
But
let's do that.
And that's what's fascinating about wine, though, because the people that are making an art out of it, they appreciate those differences. It's fun for them, the different characteristics and qualities that they get out of, the grapes that they farm each individual year. I personally think that the world is more interesting the more varied experiences you have. If somebody does want to drink something that tastes the same every night, that's fine too. That's their choice. But, it's like, each bottle of wine, is a different journey, a different experience. And I think it's fun exploring. I think it's the world's most interesting consumer product.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kevin. Hey, so Kevin, I think it was a great overview. But I want to kind of maybe wrap up on a little off note. So I came across a Wine Enthusiast magazine. They also do their own podcast. And last week, funny enough, they did an episode about natural wine, which is the very first episode that you and I did. And, my 2 cents about it, they had a moderator and a person who, people who work in the industry, like in retail, and I think importer, but neither one of them work on the ground. And on the ground, I mean, they don't visit the wineries the way you do, where you go to all the wineries, you meet the producers. As you were telling me, they take you to the land, so you see the whole process of how they make wine. And just I would tell people, listen to the first episode about natural wine that we did, and compare it to wine enthusiasts. In my opinion, Kevin, you give more in-depth answers. Their answer sounded to me like somebody who read things or heard things versus somebody who had actually been on the ground and see the things the way they actually are, which is the way you provided the answers. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I make a silly joke that I specialize in natural wine that you might actually enjoy drinking.
Yeah.
I mean, natural wine is basically just naturally fermented wine. It's become looked at a little bit more broadly than that. It's like, oh, well, shouldn't we only make it using traditional methods? Oh, you mean those 200-year-old moldy foudres that your great grandfather uses that that produces stinky aromas in the wine?
Yeah.
If that's what makes it natural wine, and cool, go for it.
Well, Kevin, was so funny because I jumped through a few episodes, and they actually had an episode where they were debunking myth. But there's one kicker, you like this one. So the natural wine episode, they had like, oh, and this episode is sponsored by, guess who, Kevin?
Gallo, I don't know.
Total Wine.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think they'll be debunking that myth on any one of their shows.
No. Yeah. Oh my God. That really is hilarious.
Yeah.
When you see the stuff that is basically manufactured somewhere in Europe, and with Saranti imports slapped on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, we don't want to get into that again. You haven't been served.
If you guys want to check it out, but Kevin, maybe one last question. I mean, it was a fun episode. I could go on all night, but I think a lot of people want to go to sleep, including us. But so I'll give you my thoughts. I actually like wine enthusiast reviewers. I like the way they assess their wines. But they do, obviously they have this podcast was sponsored by Total Wine. And the other thing is, for example, every time I'm driving to the shop, like the last couple of weeks, I heard like a grocery outlet, oh, wine enthusiast, retailer of the year. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. And then last year, guess what? It was Safeway Wine Enthusiast Outlet of the Year. And I'm pretty sure in the past, Total Wine was in that outlet.
Oh my God!
So obviously, they need marketing dollars from these big outlets. Do you feel there's a conflict of interest? Because you won't find any of those highly rated wine enthusiast wines in any of those stores. So I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts about the whole concept of being like a neutral reviewer and be sponsored by retail outlets that sell wine. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental reality is everybody has to figure out how to make a living, and those magazines, frankly, would not exist without those big, glossy, full-page ads paid for by people like Total Wine or Safeway, and then magically they end up being Wine Retailer of the Year. Yeah. I'm a little bit mystified about grocery outlet, I've heard so many stories. I distribute the wines myself, and I make this almost silly joke, but this is the reality. It's like I distribute the wines; they don't end up in floor stacks in gas stations. And
or I don't know how that's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, what's even worse is frankly to see somebody's wine, in a gas station. Or like a convenience or the mini mart, at the gas station in a floor stack. And, particularly, or my wines have been very, very popular with wine bars, but I'll get questions from the owner. Now, who else do you sell your wines to? I said, well, I distribute them myself, and I essentially give people exclusives within a geographic area to begin with, and I strictly control who I sell to. And he said, well, I just wanted to ask because I bought a wine for such and such, from another rep recently, and then a week later, I go to grocery outlet and see it priced in a floor stack for 60% or for 40% of the price I paid for it wholesale. It's like, well, how do you do that? And I said, no, well, you're never going to see that from me. And the reality is there's way too much wine out there for sale, and that somebody will, bite the bullet and say, oh, we have to just blow this stuff out, and then it ends up in a place like grocery outlet, and some of the stuff may be okay. I don't know. I don't have enough tolerance for alcohol to go, peruse grocery outlet and randomly buy this stuff to see if it is okay. But
but to me, it's I guess here's what the conflict of interest. I think maybe I could answer even my own question. It's Total Wine. Wine enthusiasts. I think the reviewers, they try to give you an honest opinion based on their experience and knowledge and education of tell you what's a good tasting wine and what's not a good tasting wine. But when they promote Total Wine and grocery outlet and Safeways, they kind of they add confusion to exactly what we were talking about. They add confusion back into the mix. So on one hand, they're trying to educate people. On the other hand, they're adding confusion into the mix, and because the impression is like, oh, all the highly rated wines from wine enthusiasts are at grocery outlet. No, there's not.
And I agree with you. I don't think the ratings are influenced by that, but you're right. It gives a misleading impression. Oh, well, here's this publication that puts out all these ratings, and then retailer of the year is grocery outlet, so I must be able to find some of those wines at grocery outlet, and then you're at grocery outlet, so it's like, oh, I'm not sure I do see any of those wines there, but I need to buy something, so I'll still buy it. And as we got into with the Languedoc earlier about all the cheap wines of the Languedoc, it hurts the wine business, frankly. I don't want to establish cartels and controlled pricing, but for a beautiful product, it really deserves more respect than just to churn this stuff out and bottle it, just try to get the most revenues possible. There's a natural limit to how much good wine can be produced. Because in fact, one of the characteristics of my portfolio, it's only estate grown fruit, and so if one of my producers, by chance got a 98-point score on some wine, it's essentially irrelevant, because if demand, tripled for it, the supplier couldn't make more of it because they only use their own fruit.
Not even Stella Rosa.
Does wine enthusiasts rate Stella Rosa or?
You know what? Here's a side note that came off a couple of years ago, and it's one of the, Kim and I, we should do an episode of stuff that boggles us. So they said, like, what's the number one phrase or something that's searched on wine enthusiasts? They said, like, we went through our records, and this is what the number one search result was, and it was Meiomi Pinot Noir, the number one search, and wine enthusiast gave it 87 points. And I was like, what the hell are you searching a wine that got 87 points as your number one search? And it cost like what, around $20, and it was just perplexing. And obviously the floor stackers, that's anybody who knows, like any grocery store you walk into, you basically trip over the Pinot Noir because they put it right in front of the door. So,
my palate is definitely different, but frankly, I've had Meiomi Pinot Noir once in my life, and it tasted like cough syrup.
No, it's but everybody knows it, right? Because it's sold everywhere. But I'm saying like the person who visits wine.com, the number one term they want to search for is Meiomi, and they got 87 points. I'm just perplexed. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Like, did they want to, if you search for it like 3 or 4 times, do you think it's going to go from 87 to 92 points maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I just realized I'm almost out of battery with my phone. Yeah.
And I think they're going to boot us anyway. I think we're coming to our time limit. All
Okay.
right, Kevin, thank you for joining us. And everybody else, thank you for joining as well. This is episode number 6. If you haven't seen the other episodes, please check it out on the vinousreverie channel. And please make comments as well. And Kevin, thanks again for all your knowledge. Really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a nice evening, Igor.
Thank
and
you
explore the Languedoc.
Yes. Yeah, I'll enjoy the wine myself. And all that Schist.
Oh, yeah, all that Schist. Know your Schist. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Good night, Igor.
Good night.